She thought she'd married beneath her. She was wrong. And by the time she understood how wrong, it was almost too late to fix it. I still remember the night I said it. We were at my sister's engagement dinner, surrounded by candles and cousins, and the smell of roasted lamb. And someone asked my husband what he did for work. He said quietly that he ran a small repair shop. I laughed. Not a cruel laugh, I told myself later, just a tired one. But my cousin Layla caught my eye across the table, and I saw her flinch, and I knew the sound I'd made wasn't kind at all. He fixes washing machines, I said, like it was a joke I was letting everyone in on. I used to dream about marrying an engineer. Instead, I got a man who smells like machine oil. A few people chuckled out of politeness. My husband, Kareem, just looked down at his plate and said nothing. That was the kind of marriage we had. Not loud, not cruel in any dramatic way. Just quietly unequal, at least in my mind. I came from a family with some money. My father owned 2 pharmacies. I'd grown up with a housekeeper, a driver, private tutors. Kareem grew up the son of a mechanic in a neighborhood I'd never once driven through before I met him. When we married, my mother cried, not from joy. She asked me more than once if I was sure. I told her love didn't care about bank accounts. I believed that mostly. But somewhere along the way, believing it stopped meaning I respected it. 5 years into our marriage, I still found small ways to remind him of the gap between us. I paid for our apartment's better furniture. Because it matters to me, I chose the restaurants. I introduced him to my friends as, my husband, he's very handy, instead of, my husband, he owns his business. I didn't think of it as cruelty. I told myself I was just being honest about our different worlds. It took me a long time to understand that honesty and contempt can wear the exact same clothes. The turning point came on an ordinary Tuesday. I'd forgotten my laptop charger at home and swung by his shop during my lunch break, which I almost never did. The bell above the door rang, and I stepped into a space that smelled like solder and coffee, lined with shelves of parts I couldn't name. Kareem was in the back, bent over a circuit board, a magnifying lamp bright over his hands. He didn't hear me come in. I watched him work for a full minute. The precision of it, the patience. Before an older man walked in from the back office holding a folder. Kareem, the Ashworth contract came through, the man said. They want to move forward with the full rollout. All 12 branches. Kareem nodded like this was nothing new, said something about scheduling the installation team for next month, and the man left. I stood there frozen. Ashworth was a name I recognized. A regional hardware chain with locations across 3 cities. I didn't understand what a rollout meant coming from a repair shop, so I asked him, trying to keep my voice light. He looked almost embarrassed, like he'd been caught at something. It's a security systems contract, he said. We do commercial installs now, not just appliance repair. I asked how long. He said 2 years. 2 years, and I hadn't known. I asked why he never told me. He set down the tool in his hand very carefully, like he needed a second before answering, and said, You already had an idea of who I was. I didn't think it would change anything if I told you the business was doing well. I thought you'd just find a new reason. That sentence sat in my chest like a stone the rest of the day. I went home and did something I'd never bothered to do in 5 years of marriage. I actually looked. I found the business registration. I found tax filings with numbers that made me sit down on the edge of our bed. I found a folder of commendation letters from clients, invoices from 4 other technicians he employed, a lease he'd quietly signed on a second location. My husband, the man I'd introduced at parties as handy, was running a business worth more than I'd ever earned in my life. And he'd let me believe otherwise, because somewhere along the way, I taught him that the truth wouldn't be safe with me. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every dinner party joke, every time I'd corrected his grammar in front of my friends, every time I'd paid for something loudly enough that he'd hear it. I hadn't married a poor man and grown to resent it. I'd married a private man, a hard-working man, and punished him for not performing wealth the way my family did. The shame of that realization was heavier than any secret he'd kept. I didn't apologize with words at first. Words felt too small. I started by asking him real questions about his work and actually listening to the answers. I asked to see the second location. I asked him to teach me what half the tools on his shelf were for. It took weeks before he stopped answering carefully, like he was still waiting for the joke at the end. One evening, months later, he finally said what I think he'd been holding back the whole time. I never needed you to be impressed by my money. I needed you to be curious about my life. That undid me more than any fight ever could have. We're different now, Kareem and I. Not because his business grew, though it has twice over since then, but because I finally learned to see him instead of measuring him. I think about that dinner often, the laugh that came out of me so easily, and I wonder how many other people are sitting across from someone extraordinary, too busy counting what they can see to notice what they can't. I got lucky. I got a second chance to know my husband. Not everyone does.